I have had to take several deep breaths, several deep breaths because this was very heavy. Okay. What happens when the person is no longer here, but yet their legacy, their soul, the feeling, as a parent watching this, me as a parent watching this and sending my son, both my kids to school this morning, and then deciding to watch this was like, wow, it really hits home. Now, if you are new here, I'm Denise Brady. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. You can tell my voice is starting to go because this was a tearjerker. Okay, this was really hard to watch as someone who has kids who trust is the system to protect them anymore. You have to send your kids to school or homeschool them. All these school shootings. It was really heavy. Okay, so we're going to get into all the empty rooms. Take some deep breaths. Notice what's coming up for you, and let's get into it. Now, watching this, I knew what it was going to be about. I knew the heaviness of it. I knew as a mother myself just how much it was going to hit me. Okay, watching these parents go into these empty rooms, and before they went to the rooms, watching them walk up the stairs, Dominic's parents walk up the stairs, I felt the silence. I'm like, this movie is not about how they passed away. This movie is not about grief. Not movie. This documentary is about the silence left behind that you have to live in when your child is taken away. All the memories that stick with you, but then at the same time, you want to remember everything, but some of the memories you don't want to remember, the hardest ones. And what that room represents untouched. Okay, what it represents untouched. And the silence was just so heavy. I think the silence was heavier than the grief. And we know silence is part of grief, but it was just something as a parent, like, ooh, you just never know. You just never know. You have to sit with the all of it, all the different emotions. And watching this, I want to do a little bit of a deep dive and talk about it and the difference between someone being physically present versus emotionally available. And I think the parents are trying to cope with their heart not being here anymore. Okay. The trauma of losing a child and how do you get through that? I don't think you ever really move on from it. Just like these rooms still sit the same way they sat when those kids went to school those days. I feel like that's where a lot of the parents' lives have been put on hold. Yes, life is moving. It's been 5 or 6 years for a lot of these families, but it hasn't for us, the parents. Okay. It hasn't for us. And I think it talks a lot of just about having to live longer than your kids. Never thinking as a parent, you're one day going to have to lay your children to rest. Your children are supposed to be laying you to rest. Okay, we see um the filmmaker Steve, Happy Steve, that we a lot of us have watched him on CBS with these happy stories. He calls it whitewashing a lot of the school shootings, trying to make some kind of positive spin on them. Okay. But I don't think there's a way of doing that. And as much as people go through these school shootings, you watch them on TV from a distance, it's a news story. And then what happens? A week later, sometimes even days later, everyone moves on from the outside. The families don't move on. They don't get the opportunity. And it's kind of a luxury for us as audience, viewers to move on from the Sandy Hooks, the Parklands, the Saugus shootings. The audience gets to move on when the families stay frozen. Because yes, it's been 5 years, but my heart is still back there. And looking at all these different rooms, Dominic's room, um, how the parents haven't even washed his clothes, y'all. Haven't even washed his clothes because they still want the scent of their baby, of their child. And so much of his personality was in that room. It still is in that room. And one of the parents said, if this room disappears, does that mean that the memory of their child disappears? I think we're caught up in a society of a popcorn generation where this news story, next, this news story, kernels are popping in the microwave, different news stories that people just move on. But as a therapist, I have often thought about what happens to the people who live those things, the different things, the school shootings, um, the different crimes. For the people reporting them and watching them, it's a story. But for the people who are living with them, the trauma of those things, they don't go away. And I'm starting to see and think more also about the people reporting the stories, the wear and tear mentally. We're seeing a lot more news reporters get to the point where they can no longer be here. And I think about how do you sit there and report on all these different tragic stories? The news does not report on good. You see a little blimp, and I guess Steve is that little blimp of the good. But constantly, especially when I was living in LA, KTLA, all these news, Fox 11, it's just heavy. And I didn't realize until I moved out of LA how much the news sucked me in and how much I was watching it all the time and how me watching it all the time affected my life. Because you're sitting there, you think all these, you're just, I think, caught up in all the negativity, all the violence, but they just give you 2 seconds of a story, maybe 3 minutes of a news story, then they move on to the next thing. But the families that are left behind have to sit with the pain. And the only thing that they have left are the items in that room to stay connected. A moment in time that will live with them forever. A moment in time that will live with them forever. The mom in this one says she has not even washed his clothes. She wants to keep that scent. And every day, a lot of us send our kids to school, and you just never know, when that last day will be. Have there been more safety parameters put in place? Can the schools really stop something from happening? Will we ever see Congress make changes, more gun awareness, more making it harder for people to access weapons? I don't think so. Because a lot of people who we've seen commit these crimes have figured out ways to still get their hands on a weapon using ghost weapons, using someone else's identity, traveling to different states. So I I have to wonder, will there ever be change? And we're seeing a lot of the students, the survivors of these stories, try and come up and be a part of change. But I feel like at times there is too much of the old guard at the gates, not letting people in, not letting people see that change is necessary. And unfortunately, there will be another story, another family that has to grieve. Okay. I want people to watch this with the mindset of this could happen to anybody. Let's stop whitewashing school shootings. Okay. Let's stop that. There's just been so many senseless acts of violence that I don't think that there's enough attention to making them more preventative. Not only that, the film focuses also on the ripple effects of the shootings, siblings, family dynamics. We saw one family where two brothers were sitting there trying to talk about their sister and how hard it was. Legacy. That's another thing. The legacy of a child. We talk about legacy of older people, adults, but the legacy a child leaves behind, the impact on siblings, parents, classmates, community members, survivor's guilt, and the survivor's guilt and silence of suffering for those who weren't there but are forever changed. The teachers, okay, the teachers. I love seeing how, some of these families are trying to be advocates, turning their grief into advocacy, a- activism. I've been talking so much, y'all. Y'all can hear it in my voice. Not by choice, but necessity. They don't want the legacy and the memory of their child to go to to be just lost. And I think that in some ways, like advocacy work becomes a way to cope, and we don't talk about that. But I think it can also be emotionally exhausting. How do these families cope? For some, it was just another news story, another shooting. But for these families, they are living with the lifelong grief. They're expected just to keep going. They're expected to keep going. But the documentary also humanizes the victims. It moves, and I enjoyed that. It did not focus so much on what happened. It didn't focus so much on who did it. It focused on showing the victims as whole people with lives and the importance of telling their stories with dignity, grief, context, and layers. Okay, a lot of layers. Now, looking at some of the mental health aspects, a lot of these families are living with PTSD, nightmares, avoidance, emotional numbness, and anger. Some of them looked at some of the notes that were left behind by their kids, the teddy bears, and then just became so emotional. Okay. And I hope that a lot of them have been in therapy, grief groups, have support, and are not trying to cope on their own. Okay. Some of the things that also got brought up for me as a viewer was validating that grief isn't linear. It doesn't follow rules. Grief can look so many different ways, especially during this holiday season. I think a lot of people are faced with grief, and we're not talking about that. Another holiday without that family member, that child at the table. We're moving forward in our lives, but emotionally, my heart is still back there. Okay. I want us to name it. I want us to call it out. I want us to talk about it. And I hope the documentary also makes people want to act on and support and advocate for gun safety and violence. Okay. Grief is not a weakness. Grief is not a weakness. It's evidence of deep love. So I want people to recognize what they're feeling, what came up as you watched it, and that grief is it's hard, but the silence is deafening. That silence watching, both the men be also parents themselves, and one man talk about the photographer taking photos of his daughter every day. That hit home too. Okay, every day you walk out the door, your kids walk out the door, and in an instance, your life can change. Is there going to be change in the way the news reports these stories? Are we ever going to see real substance change? Congress doing things? And how do you cope and live a life when you have outlived your children? The Sandy Hooks, the Parkland shooting, the Saugus shooting, the one that was in, I believe, in Texas. Was it last year or the year before? But let's not focus on the villains. Let's focus on the victims telling their stories, the families grieving, and for them to be seen, for them to be seen and heard, and not have the silence dictate how they're living, steal the joy that they still have left, and that there is still joy in this world and that you can live a life even if it is without the child next to you, without your child next to you. Now, I'm a parent watching this who has 2 kids who go to school, and I'm gonna just sit with myself for a little bit, process, see what's coming up for me because it's left me feeling like so many different ways. Okay. I want to know your thoughts. Did you watch it? Please watch it. Give it support. It's an amazing documentary. Remember to breathe, and now you're going to be okay. You're going to be okay. Okay. Well, go ahead and hit that like on this video. Let me know your thoughts. Please watch the documentary, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye.